Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers podcast. This is, of course, the podcast where we talk through all of the latest releases in the world of TV and film, some news, some upcoming things, what's worth watching, what's worth skipping. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me, as always, my co-host, Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here, Taran, as always, every week, talking TV.
Yes. Well, listen. We got some things to talk about. We've watched some of the new things. There's stuff like Daredevil came out, Mickey 17, the movie dropped, and we got some upcoming things to talk about as well. The Wheel of Time, we're going to talk about. So, some fun stuff to talk about in this episode of the podcast. But I wanted to start the podcast with some news that I thought was very interesting and annoying to me, because if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that I just watched all of a Netflix show called The Recruit. Because I was trying to check out all these new little spy shows, and I was like, hey, yeah, I'll check out the Night Agent and the whatever and the Recruit. And the Recruit was the one that I thought was the best. It was the most watchable. I wasn't the biggest fan of the second season, but I watched all of it, and I was like, all right, here we go. I finally watched one of these shows. And basically, as soon as I finished it, Netflix said, it's canceled.
That's classic Netflix, huh? That's pretty classic. 2 seasons?
It is pretty classic. I feel like I haven't gotten hit with it a lot personally. I feel like I don't watch shows that are of this kind of show before that many times.
I think 2 seasons and then being canceled is annoying enough for it to be like, they're probably gonna let it have some runway here, so I'll watch it because it's more than one season.
I thought it was a huge hit. That's what people kept saying. So it turns out, because the big thing here is that the Recruit and the Night Agent were both big hits in season 1 for both shows. Yeah. They released both season 2s, very similar style of show, like weeks within each other.
Yeah.
And they were both disappointing second seasons from the audience's perspective. From what I've heard, the Night Agent season 2 wasn't even worse and more disappointing season 2. However, in addition to that, they both saw a similar drop in audience from season 1 to season 2, which was fairly significant. I think it was something like 30 to 40% drop in audience from season 1 to season 2. The Recruit had a longer wait time between season 1 and season 2 than the Night Agent did, but they saw a similar drop. The Night Agent, though, has not been canceled yet. The reason is, even though they were both fairly big hits, the Night Agent actually had a much bigger initial audience than the Recruit. And so even though it saw a similar drop in audience, it still has quite a significant amount of audience in the first place. I don't know why the Night Agent did so much better, but that's where we are, and the Recruit is now done.
A point I was gonna make that I think doesn't add, it maybe still counts, but in terms of until I heard that the Night Agent actually did better numbers wise, so it's almost like maybe an extra tick in the box for it not being canceled yet. It doesn't mean it's been renewed.
Right.
Is I think that Noah Centineo is a bigger star than Gabriel Basso. People could agree or disagree with me on that. You would think then that potentially the Night Agent, it's doing, if it did better numbers wise and potentially is cheaper to, like, I'm focusing solely on the main cast member, which is obviously not, like, you probably think they maybe even have similar budgets, but
not even that. Just to interject quickly, but season 2 of The Recruit, you might even see on the poster, a good amount of it takes place in Korea. There's a lot of traveling that happens in The Recruit that, from the small amount of time I spent watching The Night Agent, does not happen. I would imagine that just based on traveling alone, The Recruit is probably a more expensive show to make. So yeah, that's definitely, I would imagine, a part of it.
Yeah. So if you have these 2 shows, go ahead.
Sorry, the season 2, this is worth pointing out as well. season 2 of The Recruit, originally slated for 8 episodes, was cut down to 6 during production, which is part of why the season sucked as much as it did. It didn't suck, but it was not as good as it probably could have been. So I imagine there was some budgetary stuff already happening with The Recruit, even before the disappointing numbers for season 2.
I wonder if that was budgeting. The other thing I heard a lot, this is basically what happened with House of the Dragon, where they cut an episode that was a budgetary thing, and then they basically couldn't rewrite anything because they were in the middle of the writer's strike. Probably different because that show was British, so not technically under the acting strike didn't affect, like they were able to film. There were certain places that could go ahead with their filming despite there being strikes that were happening. House of the Dragon was one of them. They just couldn't rewrite anything. I wonder whether that impacts this, like if they cut down these episodes and then you can't finagle it as much. That's interesting too. The last thing I wanted to say was I really like the Nielsen ratings. I feel like they're reflective of what it feels like people are watching. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Recently, a representative from Nielsen was on the podcast The Town with Matt Bellany, which is a like businessy insider. I think we talked about Matt Bellany a few weeks ago when he reported that the head of Disney of Star Wars for Lucasfilms, Kathleen Kennedy, was leaving. He reported that she's apparently not leaving. It was very interesting to hear how they do Nielsen ratings. Do you know how they do? And I don't mean to ask this as like so that you look foolish when you don't know the answer, because it is kind of wild to me how they do Nielsen ratings. Do you know anything about this, Darren?
Well, it's a survey. I mean, I know that it used to be that there was like that they sent out like a box to people. There
are two ways they now do it, Taran. It's correct. It used to be a box. Now it is a thing where almost every television show has a code in the background. It's basically a noise that you can't hear while you're watching it, but your Nielsen recording device can hear to tell you if you are watching the show that you are watching, and it tracks whether you are watching that. And the other thing they've been doing is they're now recording out of home viewing. This is not really probably important for things like The Recruit. It's more likely important for things like the Super Bowl and the Oscars, where you can track whether people are watching it somewhere else, which is you wear an Apple Watch device basically to track what you are watching while you are out and about. And you have to record that you are out and about and that you are watching. So if you go to a Super Bowl watch party, you have to wear your little Nielsen watch to track. I feel like this completely blew up my whole thing that like, I don't know if this is fully representative of how people are watching TV, but I guess it's about as close as we can get for the moment, without fully transparent numbers from every single streaming service and every single like network that would tell you how many people were watching. It blew my mind, Taran, that they're basically like Nielsen basically now like listens into your television to hear what you're watching.
That's actually so funny because like the big thing always used to be like, you know, they sent out this box. This is so unrepresentative of like reality. They need to like, you know, get with the times, which they have, but in the same track, like the same thought process, new technology.
Yeah, and so apparently Netflix does, I believe there's some certain streaming companies will like embed the code for their show into their show. So as you're watching The Recruit, it's giving out like a signal to your Nielsen device that you're watching The Recruit, specifically watching The Recruit. If they don't submit the code in the back end, so say like Apple, I can't remember, if Apple doesn't, Nielsen then has to figure out a way to know that you are watching an Apple TV show.
Like it's a song recognition or copyright software.
Yeah, and it's a little high pitch frequency that we can't hear, but your device can hear. And that feels to me like, yeah, in some ways technologically advanced and also so regressive.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's pretty much the only significant news I had, unless you have anything else, Grace.
No, I think the one that we've had a little bit of discussion about this. I feel like this maybe applies to the It's Coming piece, but I feel like another piece is the Last of Us a new trailer dropped today. And I feel like we tend to not talk that much about trailers. And that's mostly because modern trailers are super spoilery. It feels like it's funny if this is a show where we've both played the game. And so like, probably know what's coming, and yet I still feel to a degree trepid about watching the trailer of a thing. But it did release a new trailer just today, I believe, as we're recording this.
Yeah, I think the other thing for the most part is that like I'm rarely convinced by a trailer to watch a thing. I either know I'm gonna watch it without watching the trailer, or no, I don't want to watch it without watching the trailer. But this is a thing where like The Last of Us, I do know the story, so I could just watch the trailer. I did watch the previous one, the little teaser, which I thought was very good. So very excited for it, though. I'm seeing lots of news about it. Caitlin Devers talking about her role in the upcoming season. I think in particular, not to get too deep into The Last of Us yet, but like they've talked a lot about adapting the second game into this season and the kinds of changes that they've had to make. I still don't know what changes they're going to make. We talked about it a lot on our season 1 recaps that we did back in 2023. But like, I personally feel like there are a decent amount of changes that I think should happen for an adaptation. But we'll see. I'm interested.
Yeah, I am excited by this as well. I think the other thing, just to be on a trailer front, is that the other thing people should know is that the people who make the trailer are not the same people who make the show. And so there can sometimes be a little bit of a tonal shift. I'm actually going to talk about the way in which I thought that there was a tone to a thing I was about to watch that I watched this past week that was quite different from what the tone of the actual product was, that I feel was because the creator of the product, like the director of the film I'm going to talk about, didn't actually produce the marketing trailers for it. And so then there was this mismatch that I think can also be unhelpful in terms of like, now I feel a way about the thing, but it's only because I watched the trailer that wasn't designed by the person who made the film. And so that's not their fault, but there is this thing. And I feel like a friend Ariel from Push Recaps Theater Days is a big believer in like the art of trailers. It's one thing that he often will just go to YouTube and watch trailers that he loves because they can be so good. So not opposed to trailers, but I do feel like in terms of like flagging them for our radar, we can do a better job of like letting folks know when a trailer has come out. But in terms of like diving deep into the trailer and being like, this thing means it's going to be this thing is probably not on our to-do list when a trailer comes out. So
yeah.
All
right. Well, I think the biggest new show of the week was Daredevil Born Again, launching on Disney Plus. And it dropped the first 2 episodes. I think because I watched the original Netflix series, like there was in my mind, it was like, oh yeah, it's going to drop the whole season. But then I remembered it's Disney Plus, and apparently they don't do that on Disney Plus. So just the first 2 episodes. And it was an interesting first 2 episodes. I have since learned a lot about the production of this show that I had not been following super closely. That has definitely impacted, I think, the quality of the first 2 episodes. But I think just let's quickly get, I think, both of our thoughts. I was extremely disappointed and then back to intrigued was my interpretation of the first 2 episodes, Grace.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's the general sentiment. I think you're sort of in concert with what people I think have been feeling about the first 2 episodes of the show. I've seen, every article, right? And it's funny. I work for Prey now, and I write these articles, and I'll write something, and it feels like the more extreme I am in my reaction, the better that's going to be to get someone to click on the article. So I feel like every article I saw was either like, it's back and it's good, or it's not, it's bad. Those are the 2 things I saw. And it's funny because I think I don't think I thought the first episode was bad, but I think I understand why people didn't love it. I think that's my feeling. I'm sort of like agnostic to it at best, sort of the first, how I feel about the first episode. And then moving into the second episode, I actually quite like where they seem to be going in terms of what they're trying to set up. I also feel like there's a little bit of this, like, is it a continuation? Is it a reboot? What are they doing? I saw a lot of articles. Like, I was just trying to kind of dig around about like, are we retconning things? Are we whatever? Which I also don't really mind them. I think I have to just live with the world of like, they're never going to say, this is what we're it is in continuity or it's not, because they don't want to be locked into that. I think that's how I feel. So I liked both episodes. I definitely liked the second episode better than the first episode.
Yeah, so there's some interesting things here. They had been, to my understanding, working on this season as a different thing than it currently exists as.
Yeah.
They originally had a plan for this season to be a little bit of a reboot that was focused a little more around the Daredevil, who is a superhero, who is also a lawyer, and they were going to focus more on the lawyer side of things. And they
who already
were
exists within the MCU. He's appeared in other properties.
right. And so remember, again, this was something that Netflix produced in concert with Marvel prior to Disney kind of like fully taking over the whole thing and wanting to have full control and put this on their own platform. So this was like a continuation of that original Netflix show, but in a new direction. And they were dropping some of the characters from the original show, and the fans did not like that idea. They got very upset, and I think, to my understanding, like there was not a lot of confidence in this new direction, and they ended up scrapping it, getting new people back on, new people. I think it's the original creators of the original show back on board, and brought some of those characters back and said, okay, we heard you. Here's the new direction for this show. We're going to go and do this. However, the reality is, I believe they had shot, I think, something around 6 episodes of that season, and they did not want to scrap the footage that they shot.
Yeah.
So what we have now is a season of a show that was half shot or partially or even maybe mostly shot by a different sort of team, had a new team come in, change the direction, and bring back other characters and trying to fit it all together and make it make sense. So, with all of that said, the opening scene to this season is in addition to make some of those changes make sense, and it feels very clunky. And in particular, Daredevil on Netflix was known for its very like realistic as a superhero show violence and brutal sort of like one-ers in the way that it depicted the violence of Daredevil. And episode 1 on Disney has blatantly CGI characters flipping around and doing acrobatics. It was a very, very bad action scene. So right out of the gate, you're like, oh, this is probably going to suck. However, it then kind of gets into what it was planning on doing. I still don't know how I feel about the strength of the writing at the moment, but basically by the end of episode 2, we get a different scene of violence that was much more effective, and we are now latched onto a couple of storylines that feel a little promising. So it's a very interesting show in terms of like what the story is behind it, and I still don't know if it will turn out to be good or bad, because so far the parts I've liked the most were the parts that were scrapped.
Yeah, I mean, and then, well, and it's tough too, because I feel like it then creates the situation where, in terms of like why people like it or not, is going to be very interesting in terms of trying to parse out like what is the stuff that very clearly was the plan that they thought was not good enough, that they needed to, not that it wasn't good enough, but that they needed to like rework and fix, without losing all of the they just don't want to waste all the money or spend more money to reshoot stuff, and so yeah, it is really interesting. It is an interesting sort of thing that's here, which is, it's interesting to see, like, obviously it's a very small sample size, but the IMDb rating that's on the screen right now, this Taran has the screen up, is an 8.9. That's extremely good. That's obviously 2 episodes in, but that's not nothing to me in terms of like the sort of reception to the show. I do kind of think that, for me, who I feel like I'm a little bit more, I've watched all of Daredevil, but it's been so long that I feel like I kind of came in. I feel like I'm entering the season as much more of like and I'm not a casual, but I feel like I'm more casual than I am more like I'm so invested in this world and everything that happens in a way that I think means I'm more likely to enjoy it and just be along for the ride that they're sending me on so far than I am going to be like, super critical of how it's started. I think I don't think it's an 8.9 out of 10. I think I'm closer to that than some of the review headlines that I saw this week.
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff. We'll continue to track that as it continues on. I think the other big. Oh, go ahead.
It's being covered on We Know Scripted TV by Jason and Sasha are talking Daredevil Born Again. So if you want full recaps and more in depth and people who know a lot about this stuff, you can check out that.
They know Daredevil.
They know Daredevil.
I think the other big piece of media for the week, of course, there's some other things to talk about, but the other big one, Mickey 17. I watched it. Grace watched it. Here's why I watched it. I was able to watch it. It was not sold out. It was I was able to get tickets like day before in the good theater, and I had a good time.
So I was pretty excited for this movie. Bong Joon-ho coming back for his first movie since Parasite. And he basically did this thing where I feel like it's kind of fun that he didn't take on like a ginormous budget, but this is a budget that was over 100 mil. I think 118 is what's being reported officially by the studio. So a big budget, a big swing. This got moved around the calendar a lot, which I think had people very, very nervous. There was like one particular image from the film, like a still that was like going viral. Like I kept seeing it all the time because it was basically the only footage they revealed from the movie. I've read this book, really enjoyed the book, and was excited to see how it would be adapted. I really liked this movie, Taran. I thought it was tremendously fun. I think first and foremost, Robert Pattinson is really, really good in this movie. He is incredible. I love the voice work he's doing. I like sort of the tone he has. I just think his performance is really good. I think then you go like Naomi Ackie is also very good in this movie. Steve Yeun is pretty good. And then I think people are going to be a little bit polarized by Mark Ruffalo and maybe Toni Collette. There is like a world in which I feel like they're slightly different than what the tone of the movie is. But if you go back and look at sort of some other Bong Joon-ho stuff like Okja, this feels the most Okja coded of his movies. I actually think it does fit pretty well. It's sort of his aesthetic style is to have these like over the top villains. I still thought that they were pretty good, even if I felt like sometimes I was like butting up against something. The other piece of this is I thought that this movie actually would be more of the tone that those two people are bringing based on the trailers and the music of the film. And it's actually not. I feel like it's actually like it is silly, but it actually can be quite serious at times. Overall, I really, really liked it though, Taran. So I'm surprised it's like maybe not doing quite as well as I think. I don't think there was ever expectation that this would be a box office smash. But I don't know. You saw it. What'd you think?
So basically, in terms of box office, I think there was a lot of skepticism from like the box office community, the people who love discussing such things, and predictions for it just continued to sort of drop, and they weren't like super high to begin with, and it did end up. It won the weekend, but it is on track to like pretty significantly underperform what it needs to in order to like properly break even and such. And that kind of ties into my thoughts on it, honestly, which is that this actually performed really well for a low budget, Bong Joon-ho artsy movie. The problem is it was not a low budget movie. It was, it was $118 million that's being reported. And I feel like I probably would have enjoyed this movie a lot if it had a tenth of that budget. I think that like my issue with the movie came specifically in sort of like this. I feel like I've been saying this a lot as well. The second half of it, where it gets a bit more into the, I would imagine, higher budget stuff. I thought the first half of it was a lot more focused and grounded, even with the very silly stuff going on. Whereas the second half of it, to me, devolved a bit into a fairly generic. It kind of felt like they just dropped what they were doing and just went with like a fairly generic sort of sci-fi action, whatever, which was pretty disappointing for me. Overall, I still enjoyed it. I'm glad I went and saw it. There were some really fun parts to it, and I think that if I didn't have expectations for it, then I would probably have enjoyed it a little more. I'd probably I still feel fairly good about it. I think I gave it like a 7 out of 10. So I think pretty good stuff, but definitely not my favorite Bong Joon-ho, which to be fair is fairly typical, I think, for me and Bong Joon-ho. Like, he will make a movie that I think is amazing, and then he'll make one is like Okja. I was like, that's fine. That was a 7 out of 10. Parasite, amazing. Snowpiercer, okay, it was fine. Mother, amazing. I did love The Host, though. I can't lie. So he kind of goes back and forth for me. I did feel like the writing wasn't my favorite in this movie at times, and he is credited for writing this one. So direction was great, though. Lots of great visuals.
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty amazing. Like there's sort of like a monster creature design that I think is quite good. I think I do tend to agree with you that I think I did. It sounds like I liked it more than you, but I think I can sort of hone in here on something that I think, having read the book as well, that the book is from first person perspective. There is narration in this movie. Like Mickey 17 is narrating most of the movie. One of my biggest pet peeves, Taran, is when they start with narration and then you never hear narration again until the very end of the movie. And I feel like this movie at least didn't do that. I think there's narration the whole time. But the point being is, I do think there is such an interesting thing that this movie explores, which I feel like it's fine for me to say this movie there's Mickey 17. There's many Mickeys. That's the point. And the ethical questions of that creates, I thought was sort of like where I could feel the most being like pulled into the movie, in a way that I thought is quite fascinating and interesting, that I think the movie probably suffers in terms of like my wanting to go back and watch it again, because I know that it doesn't dive into it in the way that I think is really interesting. And I think that, having read the book, that is so present in the book in a way that I feel like it's definitely in the movie, but maybe there is a little bit of a, the way that sort of all gets resolved by the end of the movie, I think isn't the most effective examination of those themes, maybe, is the best way I can put it. But I still thought it was enjoyable, but it maybe didn't satisfy sort of that thinking itch that I wanted it. I wanted it to, which is where I dock it a little bit of points, that maybe you're docking it more points, if that makes sense.
And I feel like, and Bong Joon-ho doesn't care, because he's just like a movie nerd, and just so happy to make whatever he wants. I couldn't imagine sort of a worse follow-up to Parasite to capitalize on the momentum of that. Again, because I don't think he really cares. I think he just wants to make what he wants to make. But for this to have, I think, failed sort of in the box office, and I think people do enjoy it. I think people like it. But anybody who's looking for another Parasite is going to be like, oh, maybe I don't need to watch every Bong Joon-ho movie that comes out. And I also feel like this is fairly typical of directors that I really like after they win an Oscar. Like Danny Boyle just kind of went off and started doing wild things after Slumdog Millionaire. But this is at least, I think, again, fairly consistent with what Bong Joon-ho has done in the past. And I personally would still very much be looking out for his next projects. I think that is definitely capable of, making a very fun movie like this, but also a very, quite frankly, all of his movies are fun, maybe except for even Memories of Murder is pretty fun.
Yeah.
But those are my general thoughts. I think it's worth seeing.
Yeah.
They gave me a survey after I watched it.
Oh,
and
fun.
I gave it high praise because I want to support.
Yeah. Fair. Can
It's
I?
funny, an
Yeah.
anonymous survey. I'm
Yeah.
gonna give it higher ratings than on this podcast where I recommend.
Well, you gotta now you're attaching yourself to the Tastemaker label here. That's a quality we have to keep. Can I say I think this movie just I think that what's gonna happen is people are like, oh my god, it underperformed at the box office, blah 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 blah. This movie is going to hit streaming, and because it had a theatrical run with a decent amount of marketing,
Mm,
people are gonna be like, oh my god, this is good. This is pretty good. This might actually be like fine for this movie, and like the box office return, like I think it's about $50 million right now worldwide. It's like 20 million American, 50 worldwide. Because it pre-released in Korea, I think, is South Korea, I believe.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
it's doing
anyway,
very well there.
I could just see this movie having like a tad bit of a like, oh my god, you guys checked out this movie? Like once it hits stream, like have a little bit of time as a video on demand, and then as it hits streaming, and people be like, this is kind of good. It's like, no, I know, we know. You just nobody goes to the movies anymore, so you know.
I think there's one more quick point I want to make about this
Yes.
movie, which is that this, as you mentioned, the release for this had been delayed quite significantly.
Twice got moved.
And there is a specific thing I think in this movie that especially doesn't land now that might have pre-election, which is that there's a very clear allusion to a sort of Donald Trump-esque figure.
Yes.
And they made this movie prior to him winning the election.
Yes.
And now that he has, I think that not only does the movie feel like they might have predicted it wrong, but it also, I think, is a bit more tiresome than it might have felt at the time of making it.
I totally agree. I think like the initial worry of moving it, they initially moved it to January, which felt like a huge death knell. That was like, that feels bad to put it in January. Then it moving out of January felt good, but I do think you're right that the initial move to move it into 2025 in itself, just from I think you've hit exactly where I feel like I can tell that that character is it's a good performance, but I would probably agree that I'm like, oh, it's so just trying to be a thing that like I don't know that I'm like stomaching it all, you know? So I think it's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's Mickey 17. I know we both watched another show that came out this week, Deli Boys. Talking about expectations. This is not the poster that I originally saw for Deli Boys. I saw a different one. I wonder if they have various posters on here. I don't see it, but I saw a different poster that looked a lot more like this was going to be a sitcom about people working in a deli.
I thought it was a sitcom as well, Taran.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's not that.
Not that. So if you're going in, I for sure thought it was going to be these two guys working, and I thought the play on words was, you know, the like New Delhi, Deli Boy, like that was it. No, it's like a pretty serious like crime.
I mean, it is a comedy, but it
is a comedy,
like,
yeah.
Very quickly, there is a lot of fairly graphic violence.
There was a thing I used to say. Oh, I threw my pen. I'm so worked up about Deli Boys. There's a thing I used to say, and I can't remember who I used to talk about on Post Recaps Theater, where I was trying to like talk about tones and which ones I vibe with. And I always feel like in Wes Anderson, silly things are happening, but people react to them seriously. Yeah. Whereas this is the opposite, where serious things are happening, but they respond to them comedically. And I feel like I was expecting silly setting and things and silly responses, and it's not that. So, but it is still, they are comedically responding to serious situations. And that's what we get in this show. I thought it was pretty good. I quite liked it. I think that the story is good, and because it was unexpected to me, that actually I think helped it a little bit for me to get a little bit drawn into it. I think it's like the best show I've ever seen. Like, no, it's just like it's a good show to just like throw on and watch. And I don't think people have a bad time. I've only watched 2 episodes, so I can't say whether or not it gets better or worse from there. But I like where they started.
I've heard it gets better. I'm about like 2.5 episodes in. I've seen a lot of people say like by episode 3 it really starts to find its stride. It's been fine for me. You know, I think it looks like 10 episodes.
That's a little, yeah.
It feels like a lot because it's not a sitcom. The episodes are, a good, I think, like 40 to 60 minutes each. So it feels like a lot to me. I'm not sure I'll finish the season, but I do think that it was a lot better than I thought it would be based on the original poster. It's very funny to me that they seem to have changed the poster.
I think I also thought like Hulu, like that's kind of where I went too, that it would be a little bit like it was comedic in tone rather than whatever, which it's like, again, there is comedy elements, but it's it's about money laundering and crime families and that sort of thing. So yeah.
All right. Any other new thing, Grace?
Yeah, I watched The Leopard. I watched the first episodes of The Leopard on Netflix, which is an Italian period piece drama set in the 19th century in Sicily, where there's sort of like there isn't a unified Italy, so it's all of these like people potentially trying to like get into power. I thought it was going to be more like, I didn't think it was going to be what's American Primeval. I didn't think it was going to be that, but I thought it'd be more that than I thought it would be like romantic period piece, and it does feel a little like that. And I literally, as I was watching it, was thinking like, oh, I never went back and checked out like the second season of The Empress, and I wonder if I should just be doing that instead of watching this. So it's not that this is like bad, but it's a little like, I kind of thought there'd be more action, and there's just not as much. It's a lot of like people talking in 19th century Italian, which is, if that's your thing, that's totally fine. And for what's worth, like I wasn't like, I didn't hate the 2 episodes. Again, it just wasn't exactly what I think when you think of like, oh, it's The Leopard, I'm like, oh, there's gonna be like action, and there would be like, I don't know, fighting. Not really. It's like more like political, not Bridgerton. It's not Bridgerton, but it's like there is a sort of specific international foreign like period piece show that I feel like it fits in with like some of the other stuff Netflix has done. And I just felt like it wasn't gripping me as much as, say, for example, The Empress did. So that's The Leopard.
All right. Well, let's catch up on a couple of things then. One of which I think we should talk about Paradise, which just ended. I did forget to ask if you finished it, Grace.
I haven't finished it, but I will go and do it. I keep hearing slightly different things. I think this is another one where people are either loving it or they were kind of like put off by it at some point. I think there's a specific episode. I think we've talked about this, episode 4 maybe. And then the other thing I've heard is maybe like a little bit like the ending could have been for the way people were excited about it. The ending did maybe not feel like it matched up to that. But I do feel like this has become this is a show. I mean, I think the best example of this is that Chappelle and Rob are literally podcasted about each episode here on RHAP. So I feel like it has become it broke through, Taran. Paradise.
Yeah, I mean, phenomenal pilot. I think that what I said about it early on was that based on the creator Dan Fogelman, the creator of This Is Us, and sort of like the uneven quality of that show. I think what I said was something along the lines of like, I don't think it will be. I think the pilot will probably be the best episode of the season, but there might be some other high points.
Yeah.
I think I was partially right. I think that there were some low points. I think it was pretty uneven. I think it was around episode 4. I was like, ugh. I think the ending, as Jess is saying in the chat, was fine. However, there was another high point, and that was episode 7, the second to last episode, which was a phenomenal episode of television, I thought, and perhaps better than I would say better than the pilot. I thought it was another really good episode of TV. And even if the show is uneven, I think it's worth watching for the pilot and for this episode. In fact, I've heard people talk about, I watched the pilot and that episode and had a great time. And that was the only 2 episodes I watched. So I think that this show, and only being 8 episodes as well, I think it was totally fine to watch it. I think it's totally worth watching just for the high points. I think they'll probably continue to have other high points like that as the show continues on into its second season. And so overall, I would recommend checking it out. As you said as well, it's I think a good conversation piece. A lot of people were talking about episode 7, wanted to talk about episode 7. So yeah. Interesting stuff.
It's so interesting that it kind of broke through because the Dan Fogelman thing I think does make some sense, but I don't know that he was like a named enough person that people were like, I gotta watch the new Dan Fogelman show.
I bet there's still a ton of people that don't know that there's any connection to this.
That's what I'm saying. So then I guess Sterling K. Brown, who was in This Is Us, is the thing, or James Marsden, or like it is interesting to me how a show breaks through.
Yeah. I mean, I think Sterling K. Brown is like breakout. I think that he is starting to really gain traction. He's a very compelling actor. I think James Marsden has been sort of like really hitting a lot lately. And so all of that on top of the buzz it got from the pilot, I think there was it broke through here.
I also believe they did a fair bit of marketing, and sometimes I'll talk to my mom and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, they were on Good Morning America." My mom's Canadian; she watches Good Morning America. She's retired though, so it's okay, I think. And I believe he was on that, and my mom was like, "Oh yeah, he was on Good Morning America." And then also, I think he was on like Late Night with Jimmy Fallon as well. And I do feel like there's a tendency of like sometimes I feel like if I see someone on Seth Meyers, I'm like, "Oh, that probably like fits into like my wheelhouse of a show I might like," because they're thinking that people who watch Seth Meyers, I watch Seth Meyers, like, oh, I'm the demographic for that one. And if I see like Good Morning America is not the demographic for like a show I will watch, but it's one that my mom will watch, and that tells me something. That's obviously very anecdotal, Taran, but yeah.
All right. Well, we have a little bit of a time limit on this podcast, but let's run through a couple of other shows to catch up on, like Running Point.
I watched half of this. So I watched the first half after your recommendation last week, after I realized it was not a Netflix sports documentary. And I watched it, and I really liked it. I thought it was pretty, I mean, again, it's not like the best thing I've ever seen, but I thought it was like certainly enjoyable enough to watch 5 episodes of it in a row. I watched it all. I binged it. And I like Kate Hudson in it. I like the ensemble cast. I'm a big Drew Tarver fan. I liked him. It sort of does this thing that I think a lot of I think Netflix is having a really good run of comedies between No Good Deed and Inside Man. And I feel like there's one more that I'm forgetting. But I feel like just Nobody Wants This. I feel like this like run of kind of these comedies that are, again, it's pretty light, and then every once in a while it's like hitting you with like something a little more emotional. So like Drew Tarver's character has this like thing about not telling his family about a relationship he's in. There's like there's an adopted brother in the show, and I feel like he has this very like sweet moment at the end of one of the episodes. Like there's all of these things I think that there's a whole episode where Kate Hudson's character is deciding whether or not she's going to convert for her fiance. I feel like it is light, but then there's these like moments of tenderness and like, you know, more emotional stakes to it. And if you're invested enough in these characters, it sort of works. So I feel like this is like just good. Like Running Point was good. Is my yeah.
Totally watchable. I believe has already now been renewed for a second season.
Yep.
So it clearly has done well enough. And I did finish watching it. I think it is it's just a perfectly bingeable comedy to throw on. You're gonna have a good time, and it's gonna have a good baseline of just solid show. So good stuff there from Running Point. I believe you also checked out Toxic Town.
Yes, I watched the first 2 episodes of Toxic Town, mostly because as soon as last week you were like, it's a really hard watch. I was like, that sounds like it'll be really good. That's for me. And it is exactly that. I really like Jodie Whittaker and Amy Lou Wood. Both of them are really good, I think, in this as well. It's super tough. Obviously, Toxic Town comes from the idea that there's toxic waste and these babies are born with disabilities, or they're stillborn or what have you, and sort of the trying to have justice for that. I think it's really good. The fact that it's only 4 episodes too really helped me be like, oh yeah, I'll watch this. I'll watch half, because now I've watched half of it. I'm almost done. So I quite liked Toxic Town. Again, just like super preface with like this level of sadness and darkness might not be what you want in your television. So yeah,
I think 4 episodes was key here. I finished watching it. I think that it didn't waste time like a lot of shows would in this spot. So I really appreciated that. Performances are really good here. And it was just a neat little story that I think was done really well. So if you're looking for something like this, I think Toxic Town is a great great watch. I also finished season 2 of School Spirits, which just wrapped up. I gotta say, season 2 I thought was a fair level below season 1, especially the way that season 1 ended was really interesting and cool. And I felt like the way season 2 ended was a bit messy. I feel like almost like they didn't know what to do with their success after the first season. And we're just like, well, we need to figure out a way to keep things going. And overall, I was pretty disappointed. I'm not sure I would pick up season 3 at this point. I would just personally think of this as like, oh, it had one good season with a cool twist at the end. But I'm sure there are, and I've seen some similar sentiment amongst fans who are a little disappointed with the ending of season 2. But I'm sure many of them will stick with the show because it is still got its own kind of hook.
Okay, fun. In terms of things we were just keeping track of, I thought the Pitt was pretty good. This still continues to be very, very
big
good.
swing on the Pitt this week. I was a little bit like, oh, but especially as I've been thinking about it more, I think it's actually very brilliant and intentionally done in a way that I'm not going to say anything else, but like very interesting stuff. My skepticism is up. I'm a little worried. I don't want the Pitt to get too dramatic or extreme. And I'm worried about what the ending of this season is going to be like. But I think phenomenal swing here. I think it landed.
Yeah. I thought Yellow Jackets is pretty good this week. I'm just gonna quickly run through these. I thought the White Lotus was continues to just be like solidly good. I know people are finding the slow burn to maybe be too slow of a burn, but I really like it. I think this is one of the better I think Mike White knows like characters and moments particularly well. The last one is, interestingly, I think Severance had probably what people are saying the worst episode of the show so far. I still think it's very good. I think it's, that thing that the show has a high floor. But I think people thought that, like, especially after last week's episode, and it's been 2 episodes in a row of like not being like in the place where we want them to be. I wonder whether if we go back there next week, if people will feel like excited to be back, and maybe that's the point of like, keep us away for a little bit, we'll dive back into it. But I think everything I saw was sort of like pretty polarizing and mostly kind of negative about this last episode. Like, is this boring? This is boring.
I've gotten to the point with Severance where I'm like, I'm like not excited to watch.
Yeah,
and it happened
tough.
very quickly.
That's tough. There's a lot of good TV. I think it's interesting that like kind of all this stuff came out at the same time, and you kind of would have. I think Severance was like had the highest expectations of anything, and it's maybe like I still think it's pretty good, but I think there's stuff that you're like, I know the Pitt comes out and Yellow Jackets comes out and it's White Lotus weekend, Yeah.
Too many delay tactics. I don't like it when I feel like the show's delaying me. All right. Well, there are some upcoming shows. Just quickly before we get to the big one, I want to mention Adolescence, which is made by the same creator as Toxic Town. I don't know how he managed to put 2 shows out back to back like this.
Is this one only 4 episodes? He was like, I'll do 1 8-episode season, and then he split them.
This is 4 episodes.
Yeah, see? Does this have Stephen Graham in it, though? Did I see that? Is that his?
Yes, Stephen Graham co-created this show and stars in it. And it's about a 13-year-old who is accused of murder by a classmate. Accused of a murder, the murder of a classmate.
I got way too excited for that. I was like,
so just wanted to point that one out. There are a couple of other shows, but I want to be efficient with our time here. There's a movie, of course, coming out, Novocaine, Jack Quaid's sort of debut as a bit of a movie star, action star. This again feels to me like the same as like the Nobody one and the other one that just came out with this similar poster.
Yeah, I'm nervous for this because I feel like he's been so good at playing a jerk that I mean, I guess he's not really a jerk on The Boys. He can be sort of obnoxious, like he's like whatever, but be interesting for him to be a leading man here.
Reviews have been mixed from what I've seen.
That's what I've seen too.
Yeah. Okay, but there's one big one coming up that we for sure want to make sure
Yes.
we talk about. We're gonna shift things around a little bit here. We're gonna come back here, and then we're gonna go.
I have a couple of things this week, so we'll talk
Oh,
about.
please.
I have. Would you like me to do that first?
Yes,
Very,
please.
very quick. I'm going to run through them. Everybody's Live with John Mulaney premieres on Wednesday. So that's coming. It's going to be a weekly show. I believe it's 10 weeks. That could be too many. But it's only going to be on Wednesdays. So he's not doing a full week of shows. He's doing a Wednesday night show. So Everybody's Live with John Mulaney premieres this Wednesday. Talk show. I'm very excited for that. Top Chef. It's obviously a reality show, but that returns this week. One that I think people should be on people's radar is Dope Thief. Dope Thief premieres this Friday, I believe, on Apple TV. Let me just give my stamp of approval on the show. I've watched the whole thing. It's only coming out weekly, but I watched the whole thing. Should have an interview coming out this week with so it's Brian Tyree Henry. This is the show that he signed on to executive produce after he read the script. He didn't want to do television. He got sent the script. He said no without reading it. His manager said, you have to read it. He read it and he signed on to be an executive producer of the show. That's how much he believes in it. Also has Wagner Moura, who you know from Narcos, is in it. Civil War he was in. It has Red from Orange is the New Black as well. I think it's good. If you're expecting a romp, it's not a romp. The premise is that Brian Tyree Henry and Wagner Moura they pose as DEA agents to steal drugs and money from drug dealers. So they bust a house and then take all the money and drugs. It's not a romp.
It looks pretty serious.
Yes, I wanted it to be a romp. It's not a romp. Pretty intense. Those are the shows I got. That's what's coming out this week. I think that I'll
all right. Well, I'll list a couple more just to knock them off here. Long Bright River is coming out. This is Amanda Seyfried as a police officer searching for her sister. And Black Bag is another show coming out. Movie coming out. So,
no, that's okay.
Steven Soderbergh starring Michael Fassbender, and it's a spy thriller. So
I was going to go see Amanda Seyfried is in a Canadian movie called Seven Veils that is playing at the movie theater near me. That I was going to go check out. So maybe a big Amanda Seyfried week for me.
All right. Well, of course, we have got to talk about The Wheel of Time, which is dropping this week, starting this week at the very least. And I'm a big Wheel of Time fan. I read all the books. Many times actually. I'm probably a bigger defender of the show than most. It's had mixed reactions over the course of its run. Many people thought the first season was, I think people were sort of like disappointed / intrigued by the first season for a while. The end of the first season happened and people are like, actually that wasn't that great. Season 2 comes along, people are like, this is way better. End of season 2, people like still, I don't know if I loved the end of season 2. There have been some previews for season 3. There's a lot of optimism here for season 3 of the show. I think that the highs of the Wheel of Time show are very high, and I'm very excited to see what they do with season 3. So we're going to do a little bit of a preview here on the Tastemakers podcast for season 3 of the Wheel of Time. Grace, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I liked the show. I think I've read the first 6 books in the series. So that's what I've read. So I've not finished the series. So I'm a little bit like, I don't know where these characters are going. But I feel like I watched the first season of the show. Actually, I tried to start the show, was a little bit whatever with it. Read the first book and then went back and watched the full first season. So that's like sort of the show is the reason I got into the books. Like the fact that so many people, as the show is coming out, were excited by it is what got me to read the books. So that's sort of my connection. I actually like the show. I think the show is pretty good. I fully acknowledge that I don't have sort of the same hang-ups that other people like. I almost wonder whether if I continue to keep I want to read the whole series. If by the time I'm done and then I go back and start watching the show, maybe I'll be like, ooh, I don't like that. And I think a lot of the criticism is completely fair. There's like a thing that they do at the very beginning of the show with one of the characters where he's married and his wife died, and people didn't love that. I can sense that. I do think it's an interesting place because Amazon both has all the money in the world to do it and also really love these 8-episode seasons and really are stuck with that. And so I think that in my opinion, Rafe Judkins, creator of the show, probably gets more like hate. From everything I've read about him, he's such a huge fan of these books. It's not a project he took on because, as to just for fun adapt this. I think he's a huge fan, and I think he is disappointed with stuff that he's had to choose to leave out. So yeah, I think the thing I felt like as season 2 was about to come out, I felt like people were going back to season 1 and being like, you know what? Actually, in retrospect, I think it works better. And I don't know that I've been hearing that about season 2 as much. I also felt like people were generally kinder to season 2 as it was going than they were to season.
It was pretty popular. There were a lot of people praising season 2. I was one of them, and I did find the ending to be a little lackluster, not for the reasons most people do. I think a lot of the criticism that I see is, I would say, not super fair. I would say a lot of it leans toward like just not liking women. But I do think there are fair criticisms to make, many of which I have made. However, I think the thing about season 3 as well is that it's the first season to really not be plagued by some kind of major issue like COVID for season 1 or the strike in season 2. And so and on top of that, they had an actor change for season 2. They lost one of their main actors for the duration of season 2, who I believe is now back for season 3. So that's a separate issue than the change in actor from the other one. And so the special effects from the preview I've heard are very people really like them a lot. They're really intrigued by the intensity and the action of this preview. There's a lot of optimism, more optimism than I've seen for the Wheel of Time, I think, to this date. And I'm very, very interested to see where it goes in terms of adapting things. They are really getting into the meat of some of the best book content. And so
I agree with that.
There's a lot of anticipation and apprehension about getting to these sections. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited to see where we go with the Wheel of Time. I would recommend checking out the show in general if you like fantasy. If you have read the books, you've probably already watched it and decided whether or not you want to continue. If you haven't read the books, I would say specifically for you, don't take a lot of the criticisms you've heard to heart, because my understanding is most people who watch this show and really don't like it because they are big fans of the book. And most people who watch the show and aren't big fans of the book are able to approach it with a much more open mind, which is not meant as a defense of its method of adapting things. Personally, having read the books many times, I actually like a lot of the changes that they've made in terms of adapting things, but that is not a popular opinion. But if you haven't read these books, I would still recommend it. If you haven't read the books but are a fan of fantasy, I would recommend checking the show out, and I'm excited to see season 3.
I love the book. The books, they're long books, but I feel like they're extremely well written. And like if you do that, if you go read the books, you watch this, whatever order you do that in, I think you'll be pleasantly. I think you'll enjoy yourself. So I think the books are just extremely good. But I think, and I think we're covering around this in terms of like you and I would not be talking about season 3 of the Wheel of Time if we didn't like what we have seen so far. And so I just put that on the radar to say, if you're going to write us in feedback or send us things, I think that we are happy to be critical of the show and definitely will be critical of the show when we don't like something that's happening. But in terms of like the long-standing issue, the things that I think, just to echo your point, Taran, the things that people tend to not like about it, I don't know that I sit in that same sentiment. This to me feels extremely like The Acolyte, where it was like, oh, the things that people are complaining about are not actually the things that I'm not jiving with the show. And so and it's not that you can't write in and say something about something you don't like about the show, just being mindful of the type of criticism that we'll be engaging with throughout the show.
If you're looking to hear, like, because we will be covering season 3, very excited to do so. It will be the two of us all season long. And I also, back in season 1, I was doing YouTube video analysis of each episode, which I had a lot of fun with. So I'm excited to talk about season 3. But we are definitely not the people. If you're looking for like people to be shouting from the rooftops about how they're not giving the male characters enough cool moments. That's probably not something that I'm going to be super critical of.
Well, I do that, but Jess edits it out every episode. She edits all my complaining about the male characters not getting enough attention. I'll say, I believe my review embargo's up. I've watched the first 3 episodes of this new season already, and I liked it a fair bit. I think it's pretty good. Again, I feel like I hesitate to say that only, I know like people are listening to me and I'm reviewing things, but I'm hesitant because I'm not so Wheel of Time like I haven't read the whole series, so in terms of like, but I know what this, I know specifically which book. I've read the book that this series is adapting, and I've read past that as well. I think it's good. The other piece of it that I think, to me, listening to Rosamund Pike talk about the show, she's an executive producer on the show. She has read all of it. She narrates all the audiobooks now. You can buy them with Rosamund Pike's narration.
She hasn't gotten through all of them yet, but she is
hasn't.
working her way.
She knows this stuff, and she's also in there. And I know obviously she's invested in the show being successful and is bringing that mindset. But like, if you listen to her talk, she really understands this show in a way that I think Rafe does too. I'm very excited for this season. And yeah, 3 episodes dropping on March 13th, and then weekly from there. It'll actually be a little bit of a short run because it only runs till April 17th. 8 episode series with 3 episodes to start with. So, which will be quite a lot for us to get through, but we'll do those in one podcast, I presume. I feel like that's the way to go. We'll assume you've watched all 3 episodes when we recap week 1 of the Wheel of Time.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that. I think for me, coming from the perspective of the book, again, I grew up on these books. They were some of my first early fantasy reads. And the reason I've read the series many times is that for a while I was like rereading the entire series every time a new book came out. And that's so necessary because I have consistently forgotten what has happened in this series so many times. But what I particularly like about the show versus the books is that it breathes new life into characterization for me. Something I didn't love about the books is that even though there is a lot of development over time, I don't love the way in which Robert Jordan explores his characters' motivations and thoughts and development as much as the show actually does. And that might be controversial to some, but I really enjoy the way that the show digs deeper into things like the trauma of the experiences that these people are having and the grief and so on and so forth in terms of just exploring their characters. So really, really excited for season 3 of Wheel of Time. We'll be talking about it. And if you want to join us, you can do so. But I would recommend catching up if you haven't, because it will probably be pretty hard to start at season 3.
Yeah, I mean, for what I've seen as well, and this isn't a spoiler, but everyone's going to sort of start together based on where the end of season 2 happens. Like, most of our characters are going to be in one location, which is very fun. That they're sort of the dynamics between all of it's such a ginormous cast. It's a huge cast. All of those people before events happen that like spread everybody to where they're going on this epic fantasy adventure. There's a lot of teasing. When I was talking with I've interviewed the cast, that article should come out if it's not out already. A lot of teasing. They all get like very excited about things that are coming in terms of like new Forsaken or things that are happening in the show. So I'm pretty excited to be chatting about it with you each week, Taran.
All right. Well, that's what we have for you for the Wheel of Time then. And we will also wrap up the Tastemakers here. But this is my fault. I have an appointment that luckily the person who has told me they're late. So I have a little bit of time. So I was going to skip this, Grace.
Whoa.
I was going to skip it. I'm going to go back. This is a secret bonus for people who made it to the end of this podcast. I'm going to go back to the other background.
Yeah, we're not in
and I'm going to tell you, I finally watched Anora.
Yay! Okay, fun. Yes, the Oscar-winning Anora. Yes.
I was a little worried that I didn't watch it in time to see it before it won Best Picture.
Yeah.
And that then my expectations would be too lofty.
Yeah.
But that was not the case. I thought I would like this movie. I thought it would be my favorite as a Best Picture winner if I saw it, just based on the fact that Sean Baker was in it, was in it, who made it. And I was correct. I thought this was phenomenal. It was not the movie I thought it would be.
Interesting.
And I don't think I want to explain why, but basically, there's I had an expectation going in, and it was a bit more like a style of film that other filmmakers have done that I'm a big fan of, but it's still fairly specific and part of this movie than it was. But there was still a lot of Sean Baker in this as well, which I thought really the mixture of that was really, really fun. And so very, very happy with Anora. I think probably my favorite movie of the year, which I thought it would be.
I'm so happy.
It was.
I feel like so many people who like I would say, "Oh, it's good," and then they would watch it and they'd be like, "Yeah, so yeah, okay, yeah, no, I get it." And it's like, no, I really want people to love this movie because I do love it. So
It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea.
No,
it
I
really
agree.
is not. If you've seen Sean Baker's movies before, that is very much the case. I'd say this movie is like a mixture of Sean Baker and another style of another filmmaker that is out there. They both have very distinct styles of filmmaking. This is a mixture of the two that I think works really well. But neither style is like super accessible.
You're right. I did see a lot of Guillermo del Toro in this. No,
yeah, that's exactly what I was going for.
The monster work in Anora was incredible. No, I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you watch it. This is kind of actually one of my favorite things about the Tastemakers recently is like when people will actually tell us that they watched something because we talked about it, and either send me a message on Twitter, or on Blue Sky, or in the YouTube comments. I really love that. So if people are hanging out here and you watch something that we talked about, even not because we said it, I love to just like get a gut check whether like people end up enjoying it or not. So I always love like movie check-in. I watched this movie in September. So like right? I do need to rewatch it, I think, because
I just saw like an article about the what's it called, the life of whoever, and I was like, wow, that still hasn't come out yet.
They're saving it, I think, for next year, like the next Oscars. I think they're hoping to make a run this year. So, but I don't know. That's where Sing Sing did that. Sing Sing was delayed almost a year. It like premiered a year after it premiered at TIFF. Like it came out after the next year's TIFF, in a way that I thought was like completely unsuccessful in terms of its like Oscar run. But anyway, yeah, right. Anora, so fun.
Yes, definitely would recommend checking it out, though, you may not enjoy it quite as much as myself or Grace, but I think it is, and I think this is part of why it won Best Picture. I think that, like, you would have a hard time watching Anora and feeling like, oh, I hated that, I think. I think while it is a fairly niche kind of movie for the most part, the plot itself is relatively standard, and it is still like perfectly enjoyable to watch, I would say.
Biggest critique I've seen about it is that like people are naked in it a lot, which like I don't know what
there's a lot of nudity.
I'm pretty much like I can be pretty prudish, and I like this movie, so I don't know if people are being like, that's the Oscar winner is they're naked. It's like, who cares?
It's a movie about a sex worker.
Yeah.
I don't know what you expected.
I don't know.
All right. Well, that's what we have for you today then on the Tastemakers. We will be back next week to talk about, I imagine, we will be talking about the Wheel of Time premiere. We will give you our general thoughts here on the Tastemakers, but we'll give more specific thoughts on those recaps. And Grace, where again can people find those?
They can thoughts on what? I totally zoned out.
Oh, the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time recap. People can, so it's in the previously was the Lord of the Rings feed, podcast feed. People can. Are you talking about my specific interviews? I'm so lost right now. Jess has to edit this out. I was reading.
We will be covering the Wheel of Time.
We will be covering the Wheel of Time.
Where can people find those podcasts?
On WeKnowScriptedTV.com, on our YouTube channel, or also if you're subscribed to the specific We Know Wheel of Time feed, which is the rebranded Lord of the Rings podcast feed. You can find that as well. Yeah.
I apologize for pop quizzing you there.
No, it's okay. I was looking at something for the briefest of seconds, and I clearly was. I feel like most of the time I can like zone back in. Not today. Yeah.
Well, check those out. Tune in again next week for us as we talk about all these other shows. We'll let you know, especially as we ran through those upcoming shows, if any of them do pop up as some things worth watching. So that's what we have for you. Thank you all so much for joining us here today, and we will see all of you next time.